about my family life, my greatest blessing was being born to Doris and Edward Blunt. I grew up on a farm. We raised hogs and corn and peanuts and soybean. I was a country kid, and I loved the space, and I loved being able to explore. And my parents, when we weren't working with our father on the farm, being able to just escape and go out, and we'd have to be home when the light came on by the barn, and the rest of the day we were out exploring the country. I loved growing up with parents who wanted an education and couldn't have it. And when their 3 sons were born, they said they will have the education we didn't have because they recognized what it would mean for us. I was in a town where I could not go to the library. I was born when there was school segregation. The library that we had in school, like I mentioned in my book, didn't have novels or books by black people. I didn't know about any of that. But I had 2 parents who made sure that I was surrounded by the books they could give me. I was taught and expected to read the paper. We sat down and we watched Walter Cronkite every night. And they built a foundation for education in our family. And it is the greatest gift I ever had. And everything I've done from that, everything I've become and done since then comes from the love and the dedication my parents showed to me and my brother. So I'm always pleased to be able to speak about them. Thank you.
Family. Let's see. I too have been blessed with a wonderful, wonderful family. I moved around a lot as a kid, and every summer my mother would either accompany we 3 children, or they'd send us to northern Michigan to where my grandparents lived. And there were a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins. And so every summer I grew up in this much larger context of family. And I think that's where sort of this writing comes from, because I can look at my cousin and I can feel betrayed by her. I can dislike her. I can feel incredible loyalty, love, and jealousy, all within a moment, in a heartbeat. And that's what makes families beautiful and complex and all of those things. But also in my adult life, I have moved my children. My son said when he went to college he'd lived in 11 places. And so what's really neat about that is I've witnessed in my children loyalty and devotion when they are the only kids they know on the block. And so in my stories, I find them the most interesting, those family ties. So there you go.
Thank you. And Sue, and I know your mom is in the audience, so.
My dad too, yeah, my parents.
Oh, your dad is here too?
You guys want to wave really quick?
Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom and Dad. Yeah, I was born and raised right here in San Diego County. I was born at Sharp Hospital when all it was one building with a stork on top, and grew up in Poway, actually, going to Poway schools. And the thing about my family is we're pretty ordinary family, and we didn't have a lot of. The family was small. I don't have a lot of cousins and not a lot of aunts and uncles because of just the size of the family. So we really had like a little mini cosmos with the family that I had. Lots of family gatherings at my grandparents' house just up the road here a little bit. And I think what I saw in my family was, because we were so close and there weren't that very many of us, is that we all have that as our beginning. We can't all know what it's like to be a teacher. We can't all know what it's like to be part of the medical community. But everybody knows what it's like to be in a family, no matter what kind of family you grew up in. And I think those are the beginnings of the best and most deepest human relationships we have, are the ones we have with our mothers and fathers, with our sisters, siblings. And then out of that, we have our friendships, which are the second most deepest relationships. And so I feel like most of my stories are about one of those relationships, either one of the familial relationships or a friendship relationship. And I think it's because it's where the reader and I have our most common bond, is the relationships that we share. Even though our families are completely different, the fact that we all have a family of some sort is like a really great place to begin with the reader. So,
thank you.
think in my case, the question about how you hear and whether you're heard is something that was fundamental both to my sort of family of origin, but maybe more so to the family I've had with two daughters, because our daughters were born deaf. And it came as a shock at first, but it was such a teacher in many ways about being, how you do connect with another person. And I remember finding in my family history these two great aunts who were also sisters who were deaf in a little village in Austria, and a story about how when at night they put their babies to bed, they would tie a string from their wrist to their baby so that if the baby cried in the darkness, they would feel a tug and they'd wake up and care for their child. And that kind of connection and model of, of hearing was so strong and has made such a big impact. And I think that another thing that flows through The Yellow Bird Sings in many ways. There's a violinist who's a string instrument player who's connecting with her mother in the darkness in a separation during the war. And then in this other novel, Once We Were Home, there's really a question about, with whom a child belongs, and, it's a story about stolen children and them trying to find home, and being a hearing parent of deaf children with people who sometimes are wondering who should be raising your child. It was very personal, like it's really driven by, very personal things. So I think it does really all root up to family.
Jeffrey, race and education are integral in the emancipation of Evan Walls. Tell us Evan's story and how your own personal story impacted the telling of your book.
Evan's story is of, I think you pointed out that he was 10 years old and standing on the porch, and he makes a declaration. And when I tell you the declaration, it doesn't seem like it should mean much. He says, I want to be educated. I want to be somebody. And little did he know that that would set him apart from many in the white community who he would recognize that they would not expect him or to believe that he was academically capable once schools integrated and would be able to match the white students. But he didn't understand, and he was not prepared for the reaction of his own community to see that what he had said he was going to do was somehow perceived as color-coded white. And so he would spend the rest of his time growing up between these two cultures belonging to neither one of them. So if you've ever had the conversation of being the only woman in a room of men, you can say, well, what's it like to be the only black in a room full of white people? Well, I've had that many times. But imagine a little kid who is in a room full of white people and doesn't feel comfortable. And he's black and he's in a room full of black people and he doesn't feel comfortable. And he has no one to go to because it's a taboo subject that we don't want to talk about. Imagine him trying to navigate his life. That's the story of Evan Walls. And I can relate to that. I didn't experience anything like what I put Evan through in the book. But I got to a point where I recognized that these kids were actually killing themselves. Young kids, 9 years old, 12 years old, were actually taking their lives because of this story, and no one was speaking for them. I told my mother a story, and she was the one who said to me, you love to write, Jeffrey, this is the story you need to write. And I said to her then, but people are gonna get upset, they're gonna say I'm talking outside the family, I'm hanging out the dirty laundry. And she said to me, what is more important? What is happening to those kids and what you can do for them and for yourself, or worrying about what someone might say. So I started that. That was the beginning of writing what would become the emancipation of Evan Walls. So I lived a bit of it. I watched these kids struggle with it, and I know that there's no one there for them to speak to it, so I decided to be that person.
And we're so glad you did. Susan, you write about family and tragedies, but in such a way that the readers feel hope and inspiration rather than depressed and sad. What difficult topic did you choose to write about in your soon-to-be released new novel, Only the Beautiful, and how did you decide you would approach the writing?
Yeah, so Only the Beautiful takes place during a time in history where there was a movement that was quite popular. You don't hear much about it now, which is a good thing. It was a kind of a really bad idea, but it was the eugenics movement. And what it was this idea that if we just had healthier, happier, better children, we would have a healthier, happier, better society. And there was a concerted effort then to start controlling the gene pool. And it was really popular here in California. You'd be surprised how popular it was. And this was like the 1910s, 1920s when it started to reach the height of its popularity. And there was legislation that allowed state institutions to sterilize people without their knowledge or consent. And so they began sterilizing people right and left whom they thought were inferior and should not be contributing to the gene pool. And it wasn't just people they felt had low intelligence. It was people who were epileptics, people who were alcoholics, people who had learning disabilities. And California had sterilized upwards of 20,000 people during this time. And because it was such a popular movement here in the States, it attracted the attention of a certain political leader in Germany. Adolf Hitler was very interested in the work we were doing here and asked to see our research, which many of our eugenic leaders sent over to him. And he began his campaign in Europe with the exact same thing, sterilizing people he felt should not be having children. They took it many, many other steps forward. In fact, there was, before any of the concentration camps were built, he was rounding up and euthanizing, as he put it, euthanizing disabled children, which is all very shocking. And I hate to tell you that that's part of the premise of the book, but I do want you to know I don't leave you without hope. I don't sugarcoat anything either because it's part of our history. And I kind of feel like whatever we have experienced as a culture, especially that which we have propagated as a culture, we ought not to forget so that we don't repeat our mistakes. And even though all the eugenic laws have all been rescinded, California finally took off their eugenic legislation in the 1970s. Governor Gray Davis issued an apology. Reparation money has been set aside, but none of these people have heirs. So, do you understand? There's reparation money for the heirs of the people who were sterilized, but they have no heirs, and most of them have passed on. So the mistakes of the past are being rectified as they can be, but the mindset, I think, is still with us, that there are people in power who can decide who is worthy and who is not worthy. And that kind of ideology, I'm afraid, is persistent, and I feel like we need to be always mindful of that. And so the story is about two women impacted by the eugenics movement. A young woman here in California, an orphan, she's young, she's unmarried and pregnant, and she has synesthesia, which is a sensory abnormality, and because of that, she becomes a target of this movement. And it's also about someone in her life who is an expat, a nanny in Nazi-occupied Vienna, who takes care of a disabled child. And their paths are going to merge and converge, and I do want you to know that the book does have hope at the end of it, because even though there are a lot of people in the world who are who have terrible ideas and are inhumane in the execution of their ideas, are also really wonderful people in the world too. And so it's a book about that, but it's also a book about hope and mother love.
And that's what I love about her books, is they always leave you feeling hopeful. So thank you, Susan. Catherine, you write about an uncovered family secret in your book, The London House. Is this an actual secret that you stumbled upon? And did your own family play a role in the story somehow? Or how did you come upon this secret and tell the story?
Okay, so the story opens with a young woman, Caroline Payne, who it's about to be revealed in an Atlantic article that her great aunt was a British peer working possibly for the SOE as a spy, but who ran away with her Nazi lover. But she's never known this story. She always thought her great aunt died in childhood, but she has known that something has shadowed her family for 80 years. And you can see through 3 generations how the pain of this, even though the secret wasn't revealed, how the pain has sort of impacted 3 generations of lives. And it's really, so it's a fun story in many ways, because it does dip back into World War II and the glamour of Paris in the 1930s, but it really is a family journey. And I don't have a story like that in my past, but a story did start it. My grandmother, who was from Charleston, Southern lady who didn't like to share bad news, was also a fabulous storyteller. And after she's been passed away for many years, but a few years ago, my father learned from his cousin that her mother, my grandmother's sister, told a story that my father and his 3 siblings never knew. That when my grandmother was in her teenage years, her father remarried, and her new stepmother wanted nothing to do with my grandmother and her 2 sisters. So their father shipped them off to Miami, Florida, to live with his sister. Basically, it was very Jane Austen, quite frankly, from Emma, where Jane Fairfax goes away, et cetera. And so it got me thinking about the stories we keep and the stories we share and the stories we hide and what that means. Because although my grandmother never told the story, it had to have affected her. It had to have affected the way she thought about fathers, unconditional love, siblings, loyalty, all of those things. And so those are some of the family dynamics that play out in this story. And in June, I'm releasing another book called A Shadow in Moscow. And it is sort of that idea of a shadow and what that means when we're not transparent, which no one is truly transparent. We're all shadowed to each other to a degree. What that means to those around them. And if you're a spy in Moscow, it's a good thing to be shadowed. But so that's 2 stories, and yes, a little bit of a family link.
Thank you. Jennifer, your soon-to-be-released book, Once We Are Home, is based on the true stories of children stolen in wartime and raises heart-wrenching questions of belonging, identity, and what it really means to find home. What does it mean for you to find home? I know you talked a little bit about this already, and how did you tackle the idea for your characters who are stolen children and don't even know their own identities?
Well, let me start with the storylines. I've woven together, these are fictional lines, but they're based on true cases. So one case is a brother and sister pair who have been hidden in a Polish family during World War II, and they're being raised, in a Christian home. But after the war, with so much annihilation of the Jewry, there were missions to get Jewish children back into Jewish settings. And this would be good for the collective, but for these individual children, some of them were very attached to these new families, and there would be sort of negotiations and trying to see if they could get them back. And if they couldn't, sometimes they would just go into the fields and take those children. And so if a child was 3 years old when they were first hidden, and they were 7 when the war ended and they were coming, they had no recollection even of their Jewish roots, but they were being brought back sort of because of their being Jewish. And this is one case, and I actually met a person who did this. She was an operative trying to go back into these homes and try to, negotiate, and if they didn't, if the families didn't want to release the children, she would just take them. And then another case that I learned of at that time was that there was this famous case in France of these brothers who were in a convent, and when surviving relatives came to claim them, the clergy actually illicitly baptized them, took them on the run over the Pyrenees to try to save their Christian soul. So you've got one party trying to reclaim the Jews, and then someone else trying to keep these children Christian for their salvation. And then another case actually was mentioned about the Germanization of children. Jennifer Coburn was mentioning, and there was a case of 200,000 children who were, because of features that could match a program for national, Aryan nation or whatever, they would be taken. So for a lot of adult ideologies and or missions, these children are just being moved around in wartime. And I've been really interested in, their psychology and what it was to ever figure out their sense of identity and who they really belong to and who they are really. And so what is home to me? I mean, I think home is feeling that you belong somewhere, and knowing that this is the family that you can stay with without any question of being taken, especially if you're a child in this situation. And as I said, it had these really personal undertones just because People have ideas about where children belong. There's a Supreme Court case right now about, an indigenous child and whether they should be in their adoptive family or back with their tribe. I mean, there's cases all the time. Russian soldiers are taking Ukrainian children. All this stuff about, where are we? What are we doing with our children? And who's deciding where they belong?
Thank you. All four of you are very powerful writers who are able to intimately connect with your readers, which is really quite an extraordinary gift. I'm just wondering how you do that. I mean, how do you approach the telling of your story and know what to say to readers to draw them in without making things too depressing or too frightening, but able to get your message across? Maybe we can start with you, Catherine. Sorry.
I was really hoping to lean on those other three answers. First and foremost, it's a story. And as we talked about earlier, stories need tension. And so there's a lot of tension but there's also humor. You're right, you can talk about some pretty serious things and you can send in just one light line between siblings and the darkness is broken and the light breaks in. And so that's important because especially when you're talking about family journeys, they aren't always easy, but there are always those little connections. And so I think that's a big part of it. And I also think it's sort of the giving and withholding of information. For instance, I told you that Carolyn's great aunt was assumed to run away with her Nazi lover. Well, did she? Was that true? I mean, that's the story the family has believed for 80 years, but is that a lie completely? That's what Carolyn is trying to find out. That's why she travels to London, to the London house. And one instance when I get there, there's a lot of stuff in these letters and diary entries, but there's also this glorious house that is on Eaton Square, and it is gorgeously redone. But there's a reason it's gorgeously redone, because the mom, who is living under some pain of her own, has sort of refurbished it in her own therapy. And so you can take something dark and you can bring light to it. And that brings, this new perspective to the character, Caroline, in her search. So there's so many layers that you can bring in that interweave dark and light. And I agree with Susan. I like to end on that light hope, because I do think, as we said earlier this morning, that it is about entertaining. And at this time in our world, hope is such a precious thing to hold on to. And so I think if you can end with the light, that's a good thing.
Great answer, thank you. Jeffrey.
I think someone mentioned it earlier about what you feel when you're writing to make sure that the readers are feeling it. I think for me, that's how I approach connecting with readers. So for me, writing fiction really is kind of a meditation. I love it. In many ways, it's like me being on the couch talking to a therapist. And when I try to bring that through in bringing those feelings that I'm feeling to the reader, as Robert Frost says, if there are no tears in the writer, there are no tears in the reader. If there's no surprise in the writer, there's no surprise in the reader. So I look for those emotions that I have when I'm trying to tell the story. And I usually know, because I'm feeling, if I'm having a difficult moment writing, if I have to step away from the story for a day or two, then I actually know I got to where I wanted to be. So when someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, you made me cry," I say, "Great," because I did too, and that's exactly where I wanted you to be. So I try to recognize that when my emotions are real, when I'm giving these emotions to my characters, that is entirely likely that people will feel them. And I have had the blessing of having many people, as was spoken to today, tell you that. And I want to share one with you, a woman who bought some 30 copies of my book by herself. And the story goes, she was in her 50s, and she had gone through what Evan had gone through when she grew up. And she started reading the book, and she put it down. And she told Marley, who was my agent, who some of us share, that if Jeffrey had the courage to write this book, I had to have the courage to finish it. And when she finished it, she said she went out and she bought these copies. And for Christmas, she gave them to family members who she never really talked to about this, and to extended family, that chosen family. And in January, she said, I'm having an impromptu book club, just read this book. And she used my book to tell them her pain that she had been through. And so, and there's no better way to explain the moments that I felt that I was trying to bring about in the book than to have someone actually feel that and act upon it, and to use it to help people understand their lives. So I really do, I just want to re-emphasize, I forgot who said it earlier, but when you are feeling it as a writer and you're feeling it deeply, there's a good chance you're on the right road.
So true. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that the connection to the reader comes from being honest with yourself as a writer. If you're really being kind of in touch with yourself, and we had a conversation earlier about, you know, I don't know, it was like, it's not just what drives you to your desk, but you know, there's just these kind of deep emotional underpinnings that are leading you to get to your desk every single day. You know, what it takes to write a whole novel means, you know, there's a real drive to express yourself. And I think if you're honest in that expression, it comes out and the reader relates to it. And I think all of us have had those experiences. When I was working on The Yellowbird Sings, I was interviewing hidden children, or children who had been hidden during the Holocaust. They were older now, but they were children then. And, you know, to have people like that value what you did and be so happy you wrote this novel and say that it sort of reflected their experience. I mean, you just feel like, you know, you met you know, you met your challenge there. And yeah, but I think it's honesty. And I also think, though, that understanding the complexity of human nature, so that, you know, when you're presenting you know, not every people are both good and bad, and we all have, you know, times when we wish we were the hero, but we do something that's less than heroic, or, you know, each side, you know, a character is complex if they're real, if they're round. And so the idea that there's only darkness isn't true, because there's light in all of it. There's like the flip sides, and so I think it comes through as is the more real your characters are, the more kind of combination of emotion there will be. So there will be an actual emotional trajectory and emotional complexity, and it won't just be like hope or sadness. And that's not what any single book will be if it's round. It'll have everything, like the range and gamut of human emotion would be in it.
Thank you.
So I look at it like this when I'm trying to construct a novel, is to figure out what's the universal need that's at the heart of this, because there are things that are true about us that are always true, that transcend time and geography. And that is like the universal need for love is timeless, and the universal need for security, the universal need for acceptance, justice. There's a whole bunch of them. And when I can figure out what am I really trying to say, like I told you what this book is about, but really at the heart of it is the need we all have to feel valued. Like, does every human have intrinsic worth? And if we believe that, then we're going to feel that at the heart of that is I need to feel valued. And I think that's where reader and writer can meet, is on that common plane of recognizing this is the universal need at the heart of this novel. And no matter where you live or how old you are, or if you're reading it in a different translation than the language I wrote it in, but you'll feel that that universal need is at the heart of the story, and that's where we connect at that place where we have this in common, is that we both recognize that need that we all have.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're all serious writers, so I'd like to lighten it up a little bit and have you tell us something about you that isn't so serious. Maybe a fun hobby, a unique talent, a funny story, a memorable experience. And who am I going to put on the spot first? Nobody wants it. All right. That means that,
I'll just tell you.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you.
I've started jumping on a trampoline, okay? It's my way. It's a break from writing, but also, it's good for your core. No, but it's been very fun. I don't know if that's that fun, but it's just like, for me, I have this little trampoline in my office, and I'll work a while, and then I'll jump a while, and then I'll work a while, and I'll jump a while, and it's actually bringing some lightness, yeah.
I like that. I like that. Thank you. Okay, Sue, go ahead.
It's kind of quirky. Is that what you want, something quirky?
Sure.
To lighten up the room a little bit from the sad stories we tell?
Absolutely.
Well, I have this aversion to escalators. I've always had an aversion to escalators. I've been afraid of them all my life. And I've gotten over I can get on an escalator, I can get off an escalator, but I usually have to count to like 3 before I make the step. I have to see the yellow strip before I can take the step, and I have to have one hand free. So if I've got 2 suitcases, I'm taking the elevator. Well, I got this writing award one time, and it was at a convention center, and I had my big girl shoes on, and I had the award in my hand, and we were going down the escalator, a really, really long one to the cars. And it's as long as the ones in the Atlanta airport. You know how long those are? All the way down, and I knew I couldn't do it because I had everything, and so I took off my big girl shoes, and I sent them down first. And then I put the award on the next step, and I sent that down, and then I stepped on it, and then what happened is we all got down to the bottom. The shoes went off, the award went off, and it broke. It broke, and I had it took 10 minutes. It'd been mine for 10 minutes. And so I went back to the hotel, cried a little bit, and I texted the person who was in charge of it, and I said, I broke my award, and they had to send me, they sent me a new one. So. But if we're together, you and I, and we're approaching an escalator, you just need to know that you have to go first. I don't go first, I always have to go last, so.
That's good to know. And when my daughter was a little girl, she was afraid of elevators too, except she didn't know how to say alligators. She called them alligators. So she would always tell us, don't make me get on the alligator again. So I understand what you're going through. Who wants to go first? Jeffrey.
I kind of forgot all mine. My wife would tell you if she was here. But one kind of funny thing that happened to me that she participated in that has scarred me for life is when she and her family spends their summers on a little island off the coast of Maine, and I grew up in Virginia, and you know where the water temperatures is in the 80s. So we get married and we go up, go to my first summer on the island, and she and her friend Debbie, and they have this thing called Table Rock, where it's just above the water line at high tide and you can dive in and everything. And they say, oh, let's take Jeffrey to Table Rock. And so they all dive in and they swim back to the beach, and I'm making my way up. And now looking back on it, I see them sitting on the beach going, waiting for me to go in. And I jumped in this water, and pins and needles, I could barely make it back to the beach, and when I did, I think I slept for an hour. And they still, try to get me in the water now. There's a big tradition that when people leave the island, islanders actually jump off the dock as a waving goodbye. They still try to get me. They use kids. They say, there's a baby leaving, you can jump off for the baby. I'm not going in the water, so that's my thing.
To be honest, I'm constantly doing stupid, goofy things. Like, I had to quit running a few years ago, but my husband still runs marathons. So I want to go out with him. Do any of you know what an elliptigo is? Yes. Okay, so I'm 5'10". When I get on that elliptigo, I'm like 6'6" or something ridiculous. I have had cars stop and video record me. I mean, it's basically an elliptical machine that goes out on the road. And it's a terrifying thing. So this winter, though, goofy thing, a friend challenged me to join her weekly to sit in Lake Michigan for at least 1 to 2 songs. So we will put on little shorts and neoprene socks, and we'll go out in Lake Michigan, which, by the way, ice was floating by us last week. And we sit down until she tells us we can get up because the song's over. and we laugh the whole time because it's ridiculous. But anyway, there you go. Two silly things.
Thank you. Just wanted to keep it real a little bit. And sadly, we're out of time. So I want to thank Jennifer Rosner, Susan Meisner, Catherine Ray, and Jeffrey Blunt once again.